Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie Greenberg from Greenberg and Sienkiewicz. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we are discussing different types of relief you can get through the courts during this uncertain time. So, just to start us off, tonight I'm drinking Pinot Grigio, a lighter wine. And just to share something interesting, which Michelle and I were actually discussing right before we went live. We were talking about how it's going to be Cinco de Mayo on Tuesday, and how we're sad that we're not able to go out to a restaurant and eat like we may normally do. So my husband and I are planning to get some Cinco de Mayo takeout as a treat, and we're definitely looking forward to that. So just to remind everybody, if you have any questions while we're giving our presentation, feel free to shoot them out on our Facebook Live video, and we will answer them as we go along here. And now I'll just turn it over to Michelle to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Michelle Sienkiewicz-Ferguson from Greenberg and Sienkiewicz. I went back to my classic rosé, hoping for some nicer summer weather. It was a little chilly today. Went for a little bit of a walk for this, and it really cooled down. Something interesting, just kind of professionally, and kind of ties into what we're talking about, is we kind of saw a little bit of a slowdown in the family law arena over the past few weeks. But now we're turning a little bit of an uptick again. I think a lot of people are realizing that this COVID stuff is kind of in it for the long haul, and realizing there actually is relief that you can get. So if you're one of those people, or you know someone like that, feel free to send them our way, and you can even point them to this recording, because it will be recorded and available afterwards to kind of find out some information. So if you are someone who is affected by domestic violence, or somebody, Lori Lightfoot is actually partnered with Airbnb to support any residents seeking refuge from domestic violence during this pandemic. Coordination of this program is being facilitated through the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, and that number is 877-863-6338. And I'm sure you can go to the website as well, and also the network advocating against domestic violence. Again, the number is 877-863-6338. Additionally, we have this information both on our Facebook page, as well as our Instagram page at GreenSync Law. So if you need that information, definitely go there. You can also reach out to us as well. In terms of domestic violence, other countries have taken measures to curb domestic violence during this time, because they're seeing a lot more since everybody's kind of quarantined and stuck together. For example, parts of France have actually halted the sale of alcohol in hopes that it will curb domestic violence. Other than seeking refuge, such as through this Airbnb program, what can you do if you're experiencing domestic violence? You can always call the police, and then that could potentially turn into a criminal order of protection. Oftentimes we find clients that call us that they have not really gotten the help that they think they deserve from the police. So another option is do a civil order of protection, which is something that we can help you with as well. And now I'll turn it over to Stephanie to talk a little bit about divorce.
Sure. So, on top of orders of protection, the courts have really extended what they're doing remotely. It used to be that they were really just hearing emergency matters now, or uncontested matters, meaning everything is agreed. Now they're hearing almost everything. So even contested issues can be brought in front of the judge right now. We recently have been receiving calls from people who have told us that they heard from somebody else that they could not proceed with a divorce or get divorced right now because the courts are quote unquote closed. That's not true. There are various remote features that the courts have implemented, and they seem to be expanding those on an almost weekly basis. And that, like I just said, is including contested hearings. So there are some types of relief that you might need, especially during this time. There are emergency orders of protection, as Michelle was just discussing. So if there's been some sort of domestic violence, whether that's, towards you or towards your children, you can definitely proceed with filing an emergency order of protection at this time. There's also issues with spousal support, or otherwise known as alimony or maintenance, and child support. So these are big issues right now, especially when it comes to child support. Because of this pandemic, a lot of people have lost their jobs and are currently unemployed. So if that's happened to you, that clearly impacts your ability to make your child support payments. And if that's the case, you should go into court and ask for a modification of your support payments. People are also being furloughed at this time. So they're basically being asked to take a leave without pay until such time as their employer is able to have them back again. So if you're furloughed and you're not getting paid at this time, it's the same thing where you might want to seek a modification of your support payments. And then there are people that are just getting reduced hours, and you're unable to make as much money as you were making prior to the pandemic starting. So these are all reasons that you can ask the court to modify your support payments. And unless you do that, the court's going to say that you should have been making your court ordered support payments during this time. So it's really important that if you do fall into one of these situations, that you do go into court as soon as possible and ask for a modification, and not just stop paying child support or reduce your payments without getting a court order first. And then on top of that, you can go to court to modify your parenting time. So just like what I was discussing with unemployment, furlough, or reduced hours, if your ex spouse is still employed full time, and you're able to potentially spend more time with the children, you can ask for a modification of your parenting time and maybe seek more parenting time. On the other hand, if you're unable to see your children as much, maybe because you're working more or your schedule has changed or what have you, there can also be a modification that way as well. Right now, there's limited childcare availability. A lot of daycares are not operating right now. A lot of people are choosing not to utilize their nannies right now as well for safety reasons. So if you find yourself in a situation where you don't really have outside childcare, you might need to rely on your child's other parent to help you take care of them. Then there are issues with one parent not following Governor Pritzker's stay-at-home order, not following social distancing guidelines. So those are reasons that you might want to also have parenting time modified. And we talked about this in our last Facebook live stream, but just to briefly touch on that again, right now there are CDC guidelines for what we should all be doing as far as, staying at least 6 feet apart, not really being around people that aren't living within our residence. Now I believe starting tomorrow, everybody's required to wear a face mask if social distancing isn't possible. So if the other parent isn't abiding by these guidelines, and you feel like they're possibly endangering your child's health, that is definitely a reason that you may want to go into court and ask for parenting time to be modified. In line with that, if yourself or the child's other parent or the child themselves is sick or is at high risk of serious complications from COVID, that may be a reason why you either may want to keep the child with you, or the child may need to stay with the other parent. So courts right now, per Governor Pritzker's order, are saying that children, need to be exchanged per the court order in place. You should be abiding by your regular parenting schedule as if school was in session. However, there are likely some exceptions to that, and those would include what I was just discussing, if the child is high risk or if somebody in the household is sick. So there's also the enforcement of parenting time. So if you feel like your child's other parent is not allowing you to see the child and they don't fall into one of these exceptions, they are just withholding the child for no real valid reason, then that would be a reason you may want to proceed in court as well to enforce your parenting time, because you do have a right to be receiving the same parenting time you would have been receiving under your court order. And then if the court finds that the other parent has withheld the child or children from you, or they are violating the court order by withholding the children, you can also ask the court that that party pay your attorney's fees. And typically, with a violation of the court order, the court will mandate that that other party pay at least a portion of the attorney's fees, and the costs that you incurred by having to take them to court for those violations. If there are custody issues, parenting issues, decision-making issues during this time, you can also ask for the appointment of a guardian ad litem or child representative if this person already, hasn't already been appointed in your case. So that's an attorney that becomes involved and they represent your children's best interests. So, if some of these issues are going on, that would be a very good option. And that person could potentially help you resolve these issues without going through extensive litigation as well. I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, and she's going to discuss a little bit more things that might actually be a little bit more complicated and difficult during this pandemic and some ideas behind that.
Before I get into that, so I do have some clients and some potential clients that I've been talking to recently about potentially filing for divorce or being in the middle of a divorce who don't know if they should move forward right now just because maybe they're unemployed or things are kind of very much in flux. And my advice to them has been, if you want to proceed with the divorce, we should still continue to do that. And especially if we're working towards settlement, we can make accommodations in the marital settlement agreement that deals with, okay, this is the situation when I'm unemployed. This is the situation when I become reemployed. So there's a lot of accommodations that can be made in the settlement documents that can help out in this situation where you don't necessarily have to wait. If you're in the situation where you're not going to be settling, it might also be a good idea to get it started just because the divorce process can take a while. So if you're kind of waiting for the pandemic to end, you're looking at that plus whatever time it takes to resolve it, either by settlement or litigation. So not saying that you have to, but it's just something to consider if you're thinking if you should move forward or not at this point. So what are some things that might be harder during the pandemic? One of the things that you can often get is exclusive possession of the house. So basically what this means, if you are trying to get the other spouse out of the house, this is already a very high burden to do this. You don't have to rise to the level of domestic violence, but there have to be some pretty serious mental, emotional things happening for you to be able to get exclusive possession. I think now with COVID, this is going to be very, very difficult. I think you're going to have to be rising to the level of domestic violence for this to occur, because I don't see the court kicking people out of houses especially if they don't have another place to go, or saying, go to this other place where these other people are when we're supposed to be social distancing. So I think this is going to be a little more complicated. I've actually gotten this question from some potential clients that they're hesitant to file right now because they still have to live in the same house, which is totally understandable. So that's going to be something that's a little more difficult and challenging during this time. Not saying it's impossible, but it certainly is something that will be more difficult than it previously was. If you need any sort of services for your children, so either mental health, doctor visits, if your child is an IEP, this could be more complicated during this time. Again, there are things that can be done, and specifically if you're going through a custody, parenting, or divorce case, that we can help facilitate with that. But these things might be more complicated due to the fact that a lot of these things are closed right now or have limited access. Certain types of court procedures, such as home studies by JALs or psychiatric evaluations, also might be kind of on hold right now. These often require a lot of in-person contact, which we're all trying to avoid right now. So these types of things might be stalled for a bit. There are certain things that professionals can do in the meantime, but they're not necessarily the same or the things that need to be done to get your case to the next step. So just to talk about a little bit about things that have been in the news. We talked about this previously, but there was an ER doctor who CNN said she lost custody of her children. What it really meant was that she lost temporary parenting time. Her ex-husband went to court to try and get her parenting time suspended, and the court agreed because as an ER doctor, she would be exposed to COVID. That for the time being, that would be the case. There's lots of different opinions on this, but obviously problematic because it essentially made her choose between work and her family. In Illinois, as Stephanie was saying, you still need to transfer the kids per the regular parenting time agreement. It's essential travel. We're covered in Illinois. But interestingly enough, there are some counties, such as Davidson County, Tennessee, where they entered an order that the primary residential parent should take custody of the children within 4 hours of the shelter in place and retain custody until shelter in place is lifted. So this is obviously very problematic for the other parent, restricting that parenting time. That's what this county chose to do. And I'll be interested to see if there's any sort of modifications to that in the future, any sort of litigation related to that. There was additionally another mother in California. She requested that her ex-husband, a firefighter, be required to take a COVID test every time he wanted to see their kids. The court rejected this. His argument was that, the testing is pretty limited and, that's a huge burden, and the court agreed with him. It's important to keep in mind that county to county and even judge to judge within a county, the interpretation of an emergency may differ. So it's really important that you speak to an attorney about your specific circumstances and specifically who your judge is, just so we can give you guidance on what may be an emergency and what may not be. For example, I had an issue arise this week that one judge found to be an emergency and another judge just wouldn't. So it's just really important to, talk to your attorney about these issues. I don't know if we've had any questions come in, Stephanie.
We have not had any questions.
So if you have any questions, feel free to send them in and we can address them either personally with you or next week. Next week, we're specifically going to be talking about the stimulus and also PPP. Is the stimulus income for child support purposes? So if you receive the stimulus, do you have to pay child support on it? Additionally, can you receive funding from PPP if you owe child support? So these are just a couple of things that we'll be discussing. If you have any questions ahead of time on these two issues, as we delve into these complex financial and legal issues, we're happy to discuss them either live or kind of offline with you. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we will see you next week.